My name is Carol, and for 68 years, my life had been a quiet melody, played in the gentle key of a small Ohio town. I was a widow, a retired piano teacher, a mother, a grandmother. My days were measured by the bloom of the peonies in my garden, the comforting weight of my cat, Dusty, sleeping on my lap, and the weekly calls from my daughter Jessica. It was a simple life, a predictable one. And after losing my dear husband Frank 5 years ago, it was the quiet predictability that I cherished most. Until the day the music changed forever. I had just won $21 million in the Powerball lottery, and as I drove to my daughter's house to change her life, I overheard a whisper on her porch that shattered mine. "If we up the dose," she said, "by Christmas she won't even know her own name." Before we go any further into the darkness that followed that whisper, I want to welcome you. It means the world to me that you're here to listen to my story. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from today, what city, what country, and what time it is for you right now. Let me know in the comments below. Okay, let's go back to that chilly autumn afternoon. The moment my world tilted on its axis and spun into madness. It had started so innocently, as most life-altering moments do. A single $2 ticket bought on a whim at Miller's Grocery, the same place Frank and I had shopped for 40 years. I rarely played the lottery. Frank used to call it a tax on people who are bad at math, but he'd always say it with a wink. That day the jackpot was unusually high, and as I paid for my milk and bread, a little flicker of what if danced in my mind. What if Frank was wrong just this once? I tucked the ticket into my purse and didn't think of it again. That evening, I was settling into my favorite armchair with a cup of chamomile tea, preparing to read another chapter of a worn paperback. Dusty was purring on my lap. I saw the lottery numbers scrolling across the bottom of the local news channel. Idly, I pulled the ticket from my purse. I checked the numbers once, my reading glasses perched on my nose. A match. I checked again, my heart giving a strange little flutter. Another match. All 5 numbers. And the Powerball. It wasn't possible. Things like this didn't happen to women like me, women who clipped coupons and whose biggest thrill of the week was finding a ripe avocado. But it was real. A quiet joy so immense and overwhelming filled my chest until I felt I might burst. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I looked at the photograph of Frank on the mantelpiece, his kind eyes smiling at me. "We did it, Frankie," I whispered to the empty room. "Can you believe it?" The first pang of sorrow hit me then. This was the kind of news you share with the love of your life. But my next thought, before I even considered what I would do for myself, was of Jessica. My daughter. My only child. Life hadn't been easy for her and her husband, Mark. They were good people, I believed, but always seemed to be struggling financially. I imagined paying off their mortgage, wiping their slate clean. I saw the relief on Jessica's face, a genuine, unburdened smile I hadn't seen since she was a teenager. I pictured setting up a college fund for my granddaughter, Lily, ensuring she'd have every opportunity one never had. This money wasn't just for me, it was for them. It was a fresh start. After a surreal visit to the State Lottery Commission, I held a giant, symbolic check in an envelope. I didn't call Jessica. This was news you deliver in person. The whole way to her house, a goofy smile was plastered on my face. Guess what? I practiced under my breath. You never have to worry about money again. As I pulled into their driveway, I saw Lily's pink bicycle on the lawn. A wave of love so pure and powerful washed over me. I was about to give them the world. As I walked up the creaky steps of their porch, a low murmur drifted through the screen door. What I heard next didn't just break my heart. It shattered my entire world. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of burning leaves from a neighbor's yard. A smell I'd always associated with cozy sweaters and hot apple cider. Now it would forever smell like betrayal. I lifted my hand to knock, the envelope feeling electric with promise. But I froze. Voices from inside. Low. Conspiratorial. Mark's voice came first, devoid of any warmth, a tone I'd never heard from him before. "If we up her dosage slowly," he said, his words as flat and cold as a surgeon's scalpel, "by Christmas she won't even know her own name." My breath caught in my throat. A roaring sound filled my ears, drowning out the chirping of the crickets. This had to be a mistake. A sick joke. Maybe they were talking about a character in a movie, or a sick relative I didn't know about. My mind scrambled for a rational explanation. for any explanation other than the monstrous one that was taking shape. But then I heard my daughter's voice. My Jessica. The little girl I had taught to ride that pink bicycle on the lawn. Her voice was just as cold, just as venomous. She won't fight back, Jessica agreed, and the casual cruelty of her tone was what broke me. She's soft now. This is the only way, Mark. We have to do it. The only way. The only way for what? To get their hands on my house? My modest savings? The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. They couldn't possibly know about the lottery win. This wasn't a spontaneous, greedy impulse. This was something they had been planning before my fortune ever came into the picture. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My knees went weak, and I had to grab the peeling paint of the porch railing to keep from collapsing. The envelope slipped from my numb fingers, landing on the doormat with a soft, mocking thud. It was no longer a symbol of joy. It was a motive. A death sentence they had unknowingly written for me. My heart didn't just break. It disintegrated. It turned to dust and scattered in the cold autumn wind. All the love, all the years of sacrifice, all the happy memories I had cherished, of teaching her to read, of baking cookies, of watching her graduate, they all curdled in that single horrifying moment. I looked through the screen door and could see their shapes moving in the living room, oblivious. 2 vultures circling, waiting for me to lose my mind, not knowing I was standing right there, my mind sharper and clearer than it had ever been. I didn't knock. I didn't ring the bell. Bending down mechanically, my joints screaming in protest, I picked up the envelope. My hand was steady. My mind, which had been a whirlwind of joy just moments before, was now icily calm. I turned around, walked back down the steps, my feet feeling like lead, and got into my car. I didn't cry. I didn't even tremble. I was a machine operating on some primal instinct for survival. I drove home, the familiar streets of my town looking alien and hostile. Every smiling face seemed like a mask. Every cozy-looking house seemed to hide its own dark secrets. When I got back to my own quiet, empty home, I locked the door and slid the chain into place. I walked into the living room and sat in my late husband's armchair, the envelope lying in my lap like a dead weight. For hours I just sat there in the dark, the silence of the house pressing in on me. The woman who had left this house a few hours ago, giddy with hope, was gone forever. In her place sat someone else. Someone colder. Someone harder. Someone who understood that she was in a fight for her life. They thought I was a fragile old woman. They were about to find out they had awakened a sleeping lion. And my first move would be something they never saw coming. The sun rose the next morning, but it brought no warmth. It only illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air of a home that no longer felt safe. My grief from the night before had cooled and hardened into something else. Pure, unadulterated resolve. I wasn't going to confront them. I wasn't going to call them screaming and crying. That's what they expected. The soft, fragile old woman would fall apart, creating the very proof of her instability they needed. No, I was going to play their game, but by my own rules. And I would win. My first call was not to a lawyer, but to a local home security company I found online, one that advertised discreet surveillance. I practiced my voice before I dialed, making it sound a little shakier, a little more frail than it was. "Hello," I said into the phone. "My name is Carol. I'm a senior citizen living alone, and I've been hearing noises. I'm very frightened. I was wondering if you could install some cameras for me." A young man named Ben arrived that afternoon, his truck filled with wires and gadgets. He had a kind, open face, and I felt a pang of guilt for the lie I was about to tell him. "Ma'am, you said on the phone you were concerned about break-ins?" he asked, looking around my tidy living room. "That's right," I said, wringing my hands for effect. "There have been some strange occurrences in the neighborhood. I want the best you have, but I have a condition. I want them to be completely invisible. I get anxious, you see. I don't want to feel like I'm living in a prison." He nodded, his expression full of sympathy. "Of course, ma'am. We can do that. We have nano cameras that can be hidden almost anywhere." For the next 5 hours, Ben worked diligently. He was a true professional. He installed tiny, pinhole cameras with motion sensors and high-fidelity audio recording. One was tucked into the decorative face of the grandfather clock in the hall, its lens peering out from the center of the number 12. Another was hidden inside a smoke detector in the kitchen, giving a perfect bird's-eye view of the counters and the hallway medicine cabinet. A third was disguised as a USB charger plugged into the wall outlet right next to my favorite reading chair in the living room. Before he left, he set it all up to feed directly to a secure cloud server, accessible only by a password he helped me create on my tablet. My house was no longer just a home. It was a fortress. It was a stage, and I was now the director of this grim play. 3 days later, the actors arrived. Jessica called first, her voice syrupy sweet. "Mom, we're bringing over some of your favorite lasagna for dinner tonight. We just feel like we haven't spent enough time with you lately." The hypocrisy was so thick I could have choked on it. When they arrived, I began my performance. I greeted them at the door with a slightly vacant smile. "Jessica dear, how lovely. Did you say you were coming over?" I asked, though we had just spoken 2 hours before. I saw a quick, triumphant glance pass between her and Mark. It was working. Throughout dinner I kept it up. I called my granddaughter Lily by my cat's name. I trailed off mid-sentence while telling a story. I stared at the television without turning it on. They played their parts too, exchanging worried looks and speaking to me in slow, simple sentences. After dinner, Mark offered to help with the dishes, something he had never done in his life. As I rinsed the plates, my back to him, I could feel the invisible eyes of the smoke detector camera watching. I saw his reflection in the dark kitchen window. He glanced at the medicine cabinet in the hall. A pause. A hand in his pocket. He moved swiftly, opening the cabinet, taking out my bottle of blood pressure pills, and swapping it with an identical-looking one from his pocket. The camera captured it all in crystal-clear high definition. I watched the footage that night, my blood running cold. The casual way he did it, the utter lack of hesitation, it was chilling. I now had the proof. But proof was just the beginning. The real test would come when they returned with the papers they wanted me to sign. After that night, my first act was to protect myself. Wearing latex gloves, I carefully removed the bottle of pills Mark had planted. I emptied the contents of each capsule into a small jar, labeling it, "Evidence Pill Swap." Then, I meticulously refilled each empty capsule with simple powdered sugar, before placing them back in the bottle, and returning it to the medicine cabinet. His poison was sealed in a Ziploc bag, and hidden at the bottom of my cedar chest. From that point on, I continued my act, letting my confusion escalate. I would forget to take the fake pills, leaving the bottle untouched some mornings, just to see their frustration mount. They would call, and Jessica's sweet voice would have a sharp, impatient edge to it. "Mom, did you remember your medication today? The doctor said it's so important." They came back on a Thursday. They didn't bring food this time. They brought a leather briefcase. There were no smiles. Mark placed a thick stack of papers on my dining room table with a thud that echoed the thud of my heart against my ribs. Jessica sat across from me, her posture rigid, her eyes like chips of ice. "Mom," she began, her voice dripping with false concern. "Mark and I have been so worried about you. You're having trouble managing things. We've had some documents drawn up that will let us help take the burden off your shoulders." The top page had the words "Durable Power of Attorney" in bold letters. The second was a property transfer deed. My house. The home my husband Frank and I had poured our entire lives into. I stared at the pages, letting my eyes go unfocused, pretending the words were a confusing jumble. I blinked slowly. "What's this for, dear? Is it about the garden club?" I saw Mark's jaw tighten. Jessica's mask of patience finally cracked, shattering into a million pieces. "No, Mom, it's not about the garden club," she snapped, her voice rising, losing its syrupy sweetness and revealing the venom beneath. "It's about signing everything over to us so we can take care of you. Don't you understand?" I shook my head slowly, looking from her to Mark with wide, frightened eyes. "But I don't understand. This is my house. Frank and we built this place." That was it. The mention of my husband, of the life they were trying to erase, was the final straw for her. In a flash of pure, uncontrolled fury, her hand shot across the table. The slap was sharp. Hot. It cracked across my cheek, the sound echoing in the quiet room. My head snapped to the side, my eyes watering from the shock and the sting. Before I could even catch my breath, Mark was on his feet. He grabbed me by the shoulder, his fingers digging into my flesh like talons, and shoved me hard. I stumbled backward, my back hitting the solid oak arm of my favorite armchair with a painful jolt. Pain shot up my spine. I crumpled into the chair, genuinely trembling now, looking up at their twisted, angry faces. And in that exact moment the front door burst open. It wasn't kicked in. It was unlocked and pushed open with firm, deliberate force. It was Officer Miller, the local policeman I had visited just 2 days prior. I had shown him a small clip of the pill swap. I had told him I feared for my safety. I told him, my daughter and her husband are coming over Thursday evening to try and make me sign some papers. They get very angry when I refuse. I had given him a key. He had promised to be patrolling the area. His timing was perfect. They stared at Officer Miller, their faces a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. They had made their move, and now it was my turn. This was one of the lowest moments of my life, feeling their hands on me, seeing the hate in my own daughter's eyes. I have to ask you, if you were in my shoes, what would you have done in that moment? Would you have pressed charges right then and there? Or would you stick to a bigger plan? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And trust me, my counterattack wouldn't just be defensive, it would be devastating. Officer Miller handled the situation with practiced calm. He didn't arrest them on the spot. That wasn't the plan. I needed them to think they had gotten away with it, that this was just a minor setback. The goal was to document, to create an official record that would become another brick in the wall of evidence I was building. He took my statement about the assault, carefully noting the red, hand-shaped mark blooming on my cheek. He photographed it. He then spoke to Jessica and Mark, who, after their initial shock, launched into a pathetic pre-rehearsed story about how I'd become confused and aggressive, and that they were just trying to restrain me for my own safety. He listened patiently, his face unreadable, and then he escorted them out of my house. "I think it's best if you two leave for the evening," he said in a tone that was not a suggestion. "Mrs. Miller will call you if she needs you." He gave me a subtle, reassuring nod as they scurried out the door. The moment the door closed behind them, the adrenaline left my body and I sank onto the sofa, the silence of the room roaring in my ears. The assault was a turning point, proof they were willing to use force. But I knew a simple assault charge wasn't enough. It would become a messy, he said, she said, family dispute. I needed more. I needed to unravel their entire scheme, to expose the premeditation, the cold, hard planning that went into this. The next morning, my cheeks still aching, I called Susan. My voice was hoarse but steady. "Susan," I said, "can you come over? I need your eyes. And bring your reading glasses." My best friend for over 30 years, Susan had been a research librarian before she retired. Her mind was a steel trap, organized and methodical. And she had never, ever liked Mark, a fact she wasn't shy about. She arrived within the hour, a thermos of strong black coffee in one hand and a yellow legal pad in the other. She took one look at the fading bruise on my face and her friendly demeanor vanished, replaced by a fierce loyalty that warmed my heart. "Carol, what on earth happened?" I finally told her. Everything. The lottery win, the whisper on the porch, the cameras, the pill swap, the assault. We sat at my dining room table, the very table where I'd been attacked, and I played the videos for her on my tablet. She watched in horrified silence, her hand covering her mouth. When it was over, she didn't offer platitudes or easy comforts. She simply said, "Okay, let's get to work. Where are the documents they left?" In her panicked retreat, Jessica had forgotten the entire folder. It was a mistake born of arrogance, and it was going to be her undoing. Susan put on her reading glasses, and for the next 2 hours we worked in silence, punctuated only by the scratch of her pen on the notepad and her occasional muttered, "Oh, you have got to be kidding me." It was all there. Page after page of dense legal jargon designed to intimidate and confuse. Permanent residence waiver. Medical proxy authorization. But Susan found the smoking gun. Tucked into the back of the folder was a draft of a power of attorney document that had already been notarized. And next to the signature line for the notary was a scanned, pasted-in image of my old signature, one she must have lifted from an old check or a birthday card. "This is it, Carol," Susan said, her voice grim as she tapped the page. "This isn't just pressure. This is fraud. This is a felony. They had this ready to go." My heart pounded. We had them. But as I stared at the documents, a new sickening thought entered my mind. I remembered something else, something I had long forgotten. But the forged signature was just the tip of the iceberg. When I checked my online banking history, I found something that pointed to a level of desperation I couldn't have imagined. "Susan," I said, my voice barely audible. "Years ago, after Frank died and I broke my wrist, Jessica helped me set up my online banking. I gave her the password. I changed it later, I'm sure I did, but—" "Let's check," Susan said, her tone all business. She turned my tablet towards her. "What's the bank's website?" I logged in, my fingers fumbling on the screen. At first glance, everything seemed normal. My pension had been deposited. The usual utility bills were paid. The balance in my main checking account was what I expected it to be. I felt a small, foolish flicker of relief. Maybe I had been wrong. But Susan, ever the librarian, was more thorough. "Don't just look at the balance, Carol. Look at the fine print." Her finger pointed to a tiny link at the bottom of the page. "View account activity and login history." We clicked it. The page loaded, a simple table of dates, times, and IP addresses. Most of them were from my own home computer. But 3 recent logins, all within the last week, stood out. They were from an IP address I didn't recognize. Susan jotted it down. "My nephew David is a wizard with this stuff," she said, pulling out her phone. "Let's see what he can find." David, Susan's 20-something nephew who worked in IT, called back in less than an hour. "Aunt Sue," he said, his voice crackling over the speakerphone, "that IP address is from a public Wi-Fi network. Specifically, the County Grind coffee shop on Elm Street." My blood ran cold. The County Grind was 2 blocks from Mark's engineering firm. He must have been accessing my account during his lunch breaks, checking my balance, seeing what was there for the taking, planning his heist. The violation felt profound, like he had walked through my home, opening all my private drawers. I felt sick. But it was the next discovery that truly changed the game. "Wait a minute," I said, pointing to the screen. "I have another account here. A small one I'd forgotten about." It was a checking account I had opened for Jessica when she went to college, putting a few $1,000s in it for emergencies. I had kept it open with a small balance just in case. As I scrolled through that account's transaction history, my eyes scanning for any unauthorized withdrawals, a small, recurring payment caught my attention. It was for $250 every month, paid to a company called Pinnacle Collections. I didn't recognize the name. I had no outstanding debts. "That's odd," Susan murmured, leaning closer. "Let me look them up." She typed the name into her phone's search engine. The results came up instantly. Pinnacle Collections was a notoriously aggressive debt collection agency. They specialized in high-interest personal loans, business debts, and gambling markers. For the past 2 years, an automatic payment she must have set up had been steadily draining the account, hoping I wouldn't notice. This wasn't just greed anymore. This was a deep, dark secret. Jessica and Mark weren't just trying to get rich. They were trying to stay afloat. They were drowning in a sea of debt so vast that they were willing to destroy my mind and steal my home to save themselves. The knowledge was horrifying, but it was also a weapon. A jury might struggle to understand a daughter betraying her mother for simple greed. But they would absolutely understand a daughter betraying her mother out of pure, panicked desperation. They weren't just trying to steal my future. They were trying to use me to pay for their past mistakes. I now had motive, means, and opportunity. It was time to build my case and hire a warrior. Robert Vance has the reputation of a bulldog with a law degree. That's how Susan described him, and when I met him the next day, I understood why. His downtown office wasn't flashy. It was the kind of place that smelled of old books, leather, and quiet, unshakable power. Robert Vance was a man in his 60s, with sharp gray eyes that seemed to see right through you. He didn't waste time with small talk. "Susan told me the basics," he said, his voice a low baritone that commanded respect. He gestured to the chair opposite his large mahogany desk. "But I need to hear it from you. Tell me everything. Start from the beginning. Don't leave out a single detail." And I did. For over an hour I laid it all out. The story of the lottery win. The chilling words I overheard on the porch. I showed him the video footage from my hidden cameras on my tablet. He watched the clip of the pill swap 3 times, his expression growing grimmer with each viewing. Then he watched the clip of the slap and the shove, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. I gave him the folder of forged documents Susan and I had analyzed. I showed him the login history from the bank, the evidence of the secret payments to the debt collection agency. He listened without interruption, his face a stony mask. When I finished, he leaned back in his high-backed leather chair and was silent for a full minute. The only sound was the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner, each tick sounding like a hammer blow of judgment. Finally he spoke, his voice low and firm. Carol, this is more than a family dispute. This is a multifaceted criminal enterprise. We're looking at conspiracy to defraud, forgery, identity theft, assault, and attempted poisoning. They haven't just crossed a line. They've torched the entire map. You are in danger. A wave of validation washed over me, so powerful it almost made me weep. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. This was real. So what do we do? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. First, he said, leaning forward, his eyes locking with mine, we build a fortress. An unbreakable legal firewall around you and every asset you own. We make it so they can't touch you, not now, not ever. That afternoon, he went to work with a ruthless efficiency that was breathtaking to behold. He drafted a new last will and testament, one that completely and irrevocably disinherited Jessica. My entire estate, including the lottery winnings, would now go into a specially designed trust. Lily, my granddaughter, would be the sole beneficiary, but the trust would be managed by a neutral third-party bank until she turned 25, with strict provisions to prevent her parents from ever influencing it. Next, he drew up a new durable power of attorney and a healthcare directive, naming Susan as my sole agent, effective immediately. He filed them with the county court that same day. He sent certified letters to my bank and all my financial institutions, alerting them to suspected fraudulent activity and putting a freeze on any changes to my accounts without a direct, in-person authorization from me, which would have to be verified by a phone call to his office. He changed all my passwords, my security questions, everything. By the end of the day, I was legally protected. They had lost all potential access, all avenues of control. The defenses were in place. But I wasn't content to just sit and wait for their next attack. It was time to go on the offensive. And my first target would be their reputation. My defense was secure, but the pain of what they had done, and what they were still trying to do, festered inside me. They hadn't just attacked my finances, they had attacked my character, my very sanity. The day after Officer Miller had escorted them out, the whispers started. It was Jessica's doing, of course. She was a master manipulator, and she was preemptively poisoning the well, trying to discredit her key witness, me. I first noticed it at the grocery store a few days later. Mrs. Gable, a neighbor I'd exchanged pleasantries and gardening tips with for 20 years, saw me in the produce aisle. Her eyes widened for a split second, and then she quickly steered her cart down another aisle, pretending she hadn't seen me. The snub was so blatant, so childish, it stung more than the slap had. The slap was hot fury. This was a cold, calculated exclusion. Later that week at my church's potluck dinner, I felt it again. A circle of women I'd known for decades fell silent as I approached. They gave me tight, pitying smiles, asking if I was feeling all right, in a tone that suggested they already knew the answer. It was maddening. I later heard from my loyal friend Susan, who had done some digging, that Jessica had been calling everyone in our shared social circle. She was weeping, telling them a heartbreaking story about how my mind was starting to go. She claimed I was having violent outbursts, that I had developed a terrible paranoia and was making up wild stories. She explained the police visit as a tragic misunderstanding, claiming Mark had only been trying to calm me down when I'd had a frightening episode. They were painting me as a tragic, unstable old woman, a danger to herself. The isolation was a unique kind of cruelty. They were trying to erase me from my own community to turn my friends against me. It was a calculated move to ensure that if I ever did speak up, no one would believe me. That night, sitting alone in my silent house, I felt a flicker of doubt. What if they succeeded? What if everyone believed them? What if I ended up alone, with only my money for company? That flicker of doubt was quickly extinguished by a hot flame of anger. They wanted to play dirty? I could be strategic. They wanted to use whispers? My whispers would be backed by undeniable proof. Working with Robert Vance, I prepared 3 identical packages. Each contained a simple, unlabeled USB drive and a single sheet of paper with a typed, anonymous note. For your review. This concerns the welfare of a senior citizen and the integrity of your organization. Inside each drive were 3 files, carefully edited by a specialist Robert recommended. The crystal-clear video of Mark swapping my pills, a short, shocking clip of Jessica slapping me across the face, and scans of the forged power of attorney with my pasted-on signature and the fake notary stamp. The first package was sent by bonded courier to the CEO and the entire board of directors of Mark's engineering firm. The second went to the chairman of the board of the children's charity where Jessica was a director. The third was sent to the state's Adult Protective Services Agency, officially launching an investigation outside of the local police. I didn't put my name on them. I didn't have to. The evidence would speak for itself. I felt isolated and hurt, but their smear campaign made me even more determined. They wanted to paint me as crazy? I was about to show them what a crazy old woman with a multi-million-dollar fortune and a brilliant lawyer could really do. It took less than 48 hours for the first domino to fall. I received a call from Susan, her voice buzzing with an excitement she didn't try to hide. "Carol, you won't believe this," she said. "My nephew, David. His best friend works in the HR department at Mark's firm, a company called Apex Engineering. He said an emergency, closed-door meeting of the board was called this morning. The CEO was furious. 2 hours later, Mark was called into the head office and seen leaving the building with a small box of his personal belongings. He was fired, Carol. Effective immediately. Apparently, a multi-million-dollar engineering firm that builds bridges and public works couldn't afford the liability, or the appalling publicity, of employing a man caught on camera assaulting and attempting to drug his elderly mother-in-law. The video had been their undoing. I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. It wasn't joy, but it was the cold, clean feeling of a consequence delivered. One down, one to go. Jessica's fall was slower, but in many ways more public and humiliating. The charity she worked for, Futures for Kids, prided itself on its pristine public image and its connection to the community. The anonymous USB drive landed on the chairman's desk like a grenade. They launched an immediate and very quiet internal audit. They didn't fire her right away. They were too worried about a wrongful termination suit from a woman who was already painting herself as the dutiful daughter of a mentally ill mother. Instead, they placed her on indefinite administrative leave, citing personal family matters. But the real damage was happening behind the scenes. One of the board members, a prominent local philanthropist whose wife was in my book club, had apparently been horrified by the video evidence. He started making quiet phone calls. Within a week, 2 major corporate sponsors had pulled their funding from the charity's upcoming annual gala, citing concerns about the organization's leadership and ethical oversight. The charity, fearing a total collapse and a public relations nightmare, quietly asked for Jessica's resignation. She refused, digging in her heels, claiming she was the victim of a smear campaign by her unwell mother. But the final blow came from a place neither of us expected. A young woman, a former administrative assistant at the charity, had quit months earlier due to Jessica's toxic and bullying management style. After hearing the rumors swirling around town about Jessica's leave of absence, she put 2 and 2 together. She found Robert Vance's name online and contacted him. She told him that for years, she had suspected Jessica was fudging expense reports and using the charity's credit card for personal purchases. Lavish dinners, expensive clothes, even a spa weekend. She had been too scared to speak up before, but now she was ready to talk. And she had copies of the receipts. Jessica wasn't just a monster at home, she was a fraud at work too. The web of her lies was unraveling thread by painful thread. Mark lost his job within a week. Jessica was clinging to hers by a thread. They were cornered animals, and I knew cornered animals were the most dangerous. Their next move proved me right. Strategic pause/retention CTA. A narrator's voice. It's amazing how quickly a life built on lies can fall apart, isn't it? Thank you so much for sticking with my story this far. It's a difficult one to tell, but your support just by listening means everything to me. If you're still with me on this journey, do me a favor and just type the number 1 in the comments so I know you're still here. Okay, let's get back to it. Because their desperation was about to take a much, much darker turn. With their professional lives in ruins and their secret debts still looming, their desperation escalated to a terrifying new level. They were past the point of subtle manipulation. They were now reckless, and their recklessness was about to turn deadly. It happened on a Tuesday evening. I had spent the afternoon volunteering at the local library, a small joy I'd recently allowed myself. The quiet aisles and the smell of old paper were a balm to my frayed nerves. I came home as dusk was settling, the air growing cool and carrying the first real bite of winter. As I walked up my back porch steps, fumbling for my keys, I noticed something was wrong. The door, which I always double-bolted out of a newfound sense of caution, was unlocked. The deadbolt was thrown, but the simple doorknob lock wasn't engaged. I distinctly remembered locking both. I was never careless about locks. Not anymore. My heart started to pound a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I pushed the door open slowly, my ears straining for any sound inside. Silence. The house was still. Too still. Dusty. I called out to my cat, my voice a nervous tremor. Nothing. I stepped inside, my purse clutched like a weapon. Nothing looked out of place. The mail was on the hall table where I'd left it. The living room was tidy. Had I just imagined it? Was their gaslighting campaign finally getting to me, making me second-guess my own actions? The thought was terrifying. I walked into the kitchen to make a cup of tea to calm my nerves. My hand reached for my favorite tin of loose-leaf chamomile, a soothing blend I drank every night before bed. As I lifted the lid, I paused. There was a faint, almost imperceptible smudge on the silver rim, like a fingerprint had been wiped away hastily. And the scent? It was mostly chamomile, but underneath it there was a faint, bitter chemical smell that didn't belong. My breath hitched. I leaned closer, my heart now a cold lump of ice in my chest. I peered at the dried flowers and herbs inside. Sprinkled amongst the pale yellow blossoms were tiny white granules. They looked like sugar, but they weren't uniform. They were out of place. They were wrong. I didn't scream. I didn't touch it. My mind, now honed by weeks of vigilance, went into overdrive. I backed away slowly from the counter, took out my phone, and with trembling fingers, called the one person I knew would believe me without question. "Officer Miller," I said, my voice low and urgent, trying to keep the panic from cracking it wide open. "It's Carol. I think they've been in my house. And I think they poisoned my tea." His team arrived in less than 20 minutes, no sirens, no flashing lights. They were discreet and professional. A forensic officer wearing gloves carefully took samples from the tea tin, placing it in an evidence bag. They dusted for fingerprints around the back door, finding faint smudges on the lock. Officer Miller took my statement, his expression grim and tight. "Don't touch anything else, Carol," he advised. "We'll get this tested immediately. And we're putting a patrol car on your street, 24/7. 2 days later the call came. The lab report was conclusive. The granules in my tea were a high-potency sedative, crushed into a fine powder. The toxicologist confirmed it was the same compound found in the pills Mark had tried to swap my medication with, only in a much higher, potentially lethal dose. Had I made my tea that night, I likely would have fallen asleep and never woken up. This was no longer about money or control. This was attempted murder. The game was over. It was time for the war to end. The discovery of the poison tea changed everything. It was the final undeniable piece of the puzzle. The district attorney's office took over the case with a new, chilling intensity, upgrading the potential charges significantly. Robert Vance filed a civil suit against them for damages, a strategic move to freeze any remaining assets they had. But the criminal investigation was now the main event. Jessica and Mark were brought in for questioning, of course. They denied everything, their faces models of shocked innocence. They claimed I was setting them up, that I was a vindictive old woman losing her grip on reality, desperate for attention. But this time their lies fell flat against the cold, hard science of a toxicology report. Then, about 2 weeks later, as the investigation was tightening its net around them, an invitation arrived in the mail. The envelope was thick, expensive cream-colored cardstock. My hands were perfectly steady as I slid it open. Inside, an engraved card announced that Jessica and Mark cordially invite you to a special dinner to honor and appreciate their beloved mother, Carol. It was to be held at the Willow Creek Inn, the fanciest, most exclusive restaurant in the county. It was so audacious, so brazen, I almost had to laugh. It was a public relations stunt of the highest order, a desperate, last-ditch effort to present a united family front to the community they had so thoroughly poisoned against me. They were planning to parade me around like a prop, to manufacture a scene of loving reconciliation for everyone to see. They were counting on me to play along, either out of a lingering sense of maternal duty or more likely out of fear. They truly believed even now that they could still manipulate me. They had underestimated me at every turn. This would be their final mistake. I picked up the phone. My first call was to Robert Vance. "Robert, it's Carol. I got the invitation," I said. "And I'm going." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Carol, are you sure that's wise? It's a viper's nest." "It's the perfect stage," I replied, my voice cold as steel. "It's a trap, but not for me. It's for them. It's time for the final act, and they've been kind enough to set the stage themselves." My second call was to the lead detective on my case, a sharp woman named Detective Ortega who had taken over from Officer Miller. I told her their plan. I told her mine. There was a long silence on the line. Then, "Ma'am," she said, and I could hear the hint of a smile in her voice. "That's quite a plan. We'll be there. We'll be out of sight, but we'll be there." The night of the dinner, I took my time getting ready. I chose a simple but elegant navy blue dress. I wore the pearl earrings my husband Frank had given me on our 25th anniversary. As I looked at myself in the mirror, I didn't see a frightened old woman. I saw a survivor, a warrior. I felt no fear, no anxiety, only a profound, chilling calm. As I drove to the restaurant, I saw the parking lot was full. The local elite were all there, drawn in by the morbid curiosity of the town's biggest scandal. I walked in, head held high. A hostess led me to the head table, right next to the small stage and podium. Jessica rushed over, engulfing me in a theatrical hug that smelled of expensive perfume and deceit. "Mom, you came," she gushed, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "I'm so happy." I simply smiled, a small, serene smile. The evening wore on, a surreal performance of false pleasantries. Finally, after dessert, Jessica and Mark walked to the podium. Jessica tapped the microphone, a practiced smile on her face. She began a long saccharine speech about family, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and daughter. Just as she said the words, "And now I want to honor the woman who gave me everything," the main doors of the restaurant swung open. The end had arrived. The two large oak doors of the private dining room opened not with a crash, but with a quiet, authoritative push that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. Two men and a woman in plain clothes stepped inside. They weren't in uniform, but they carried themselves with an unmistakable aura of law enforcement. The light chatter and clinking of glasses died away instantly. A hush fell over the room. Every eye turned to the door. I recognized Detective Ortega immediately. She didn't scan the crowd. Her eyes, sharp and focused, went straight to the podium. She and one of the male detectives began to walk calmly, deliberately, down the center aisle. They moved past the tables of shocked local business owners and socialites, their footsteps echoing softly on the polished hardwood floor. The other detective remained by the door, a silent, imposing guard. Jessica faltered, her speech cut short. The practiced smile froze on her face, then melted into a mask of confusion, then dawning horror. Mark, standing beside her, turned a pasty, sickly white. He looked like a cornered rat, eyes darting around for an escape that didn't exist. Detective Ortega stopped directly in front of the podium. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. In the dead silence, her words were as clear as a bell. "Jessica and Mark," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "You are under arrest." A collective gasp went through the crowd. It was a soft, sibilant sound, a ripple of shock spreading through the room. "On what charge?" Jessica managed to stammer, her hand clutching the podium for support as if it could save her. "This is a mistake. It's a misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding," Detective Ortega replied, her tone icy. "You are being arrested on suspicion of conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery, assault on a person over 65, and attempted murder." She ticked the charges off as if reading a grocery list. Each word was a hammer blow. dismantling their carefully constructed facade in front of everyone they had ever tried to impress. The second detective moved around to Mark's side. "Please turn around and place your hands behind your backs," he said calmly. In perfect unison they were cuffed. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs snapping shut was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of justice. It was the sound of the end of my nightmare. A few people in the crowd gasped. One woman let out a small shriek. Phones were already being discreetly raised to record the humiliation. As they were being led away, speechless and defeated, through the stunned crowd, I felt a small hand slip into mine. I looked down. It was Lily. She had been sitting at a small table with a family friend. Her eyes were wide, filled with a confusing mix of fear, sadness, and a heartbreaking amount of relief. She hadn't run to her parents. She had come to me. She squeezed my hand, her small fingers a lifeline in the swirling chaos of the room. I looked up, my eyes scanning the crowd of gawking faces. My gaze met that of Mrs. Gable, the neighbor who had snubbed me, who had believed the lies. Her face was pale with dawning comprehension and deep, profound shame. She quickly looked away, unable to meet my eyes. The spell was broken. The truth in all its ugly, brutal detail was finally out. It hadn't been whispered in the shadows. It had been announced under the bright lights of their own self-made stage. As I held my granddaughter's hand, I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I felt a deep, soul-shaking relief. I had survived. We had survived. The truth had finally come out, not as a whisper but as a roar. The trials were swift. It turned out that a room full of a town's most influential citizens witnessing an arrest for attempted murder is a powerful motivator for the justice system. With the mountain of evidence, the crystal-clear video footage, the damning toxicology report on the tea, the meticulously documented forged documents, and the explosive testimony from Jessica's former assistant about her financial crimes, their defense crumbled into dust. Mark, in a desperate, cowardly attempt to save himself, turned on Jessica. He took a plea deal, painting her as the manipulative mastermind behind the entire scheme. It didn't save him from prison, but it did earn him a slightly reduced sentence. He received 10 years. Jessica, identified as the primary instigator and the one who committed the physical assault, received 15. Months passed. The seasons changed. The leaves turned, fell, and the first snows of winter dusted the ground. The world kept moving, but my world had been irrevocably altered. I worked with therapists, both for myself and for Lily, trying to piece together a new sense of normalcy from the wreckage. Lily was a resilient child, but the trauma ran deep. We took it one day at a time. One cold, gray morning, I found myself driving to the state penitentiary for women. I had resisted for a long time. Susan told me I didn't owe her anything, not even a final conversation. But I knew this visit wasn't for her. It was for me. I needed to close the final chapter. The visitation room was sterile and cold, smelling of antiseptic and despair. Jessica was let in, wearing a drab gray uniform that seemed to drain all the color from her. She was thinner, the vibrant, entitled energy she once had completely extinguished. She looked older, haunted. We sat across from each other at a metal table, a thick pane of glass separating us, a symbol of the chasm that now lay between us. We didn't speak for a long time. There were no tears, no accusations. The silence was heavy with the weight of everything that had been destroyed. Finally, I picked up the phone receiver on my side of the glass. She mirrored the action, her movements slow, weary. Why? It was the only question that mattered. The only one I needed an answer to, not for the court, but for the mother inside me who was still grieving. Her eyes for the first time met mine. They were empty of the fire and fury I remembered, filled only with a deep, hollow exhaustion. "It started small," she whispered, her voice raspy and used. "Mark had some gambling debts from before we were married. He kept it from me. Then my online boutique, it failed. We lost everything we put into it. We were drowning, Mom. We took out high-interest loans. We were hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. Every day was a panic, just trying to keep our heads above water." She took a shaky breath, looking down at her hands. "When you lived simply so peacefully in that big house that was all paid for, a part of me started to hate you for it. I was jealous. I felt like a failure. The plan, it wasn't supposed to get violent. We just wanted to get you declared incompetent, get you into a care facility, sell the house, and pay off the debts. We thought we could just erase the problem. I listened. I heard the pathetic excuses, the self-pity. But underneath it all, I heard the confession of a soul that had been corroded by secrets and desperation. She had made her choices. I know, I said quietly. I know about the debts. A flicker of surprise in her eyes. How? You left a trail, I replied. I paused, gathering my strength for what I came to say. I don't forgive what you did, Jessica. I don't think I ever can. The woman who did those things is a stranger to me. But I am letting go of the hate. I'm doing it for me. And I'm doing it for Lily. You have to live with what you've done. I refuse to let it poison the rest of my life. I placed my hand on the cold glass, a final symbolic barrier between two worlds. Then I stood up, hung up the phone, and walked out without looking back. I left the visitation room not feeling like a victor, but like a survivor who had finally reached the shore. My war was over, but my new life was just beginning. Leaving the prison behind, I felt as though a physical weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The fight was done. The truth was settled. Now all that was left was the quiet, unglamorous, and essential work of healing. The lottery money, the catalyst for so much pain, had been sitting in a secure trust, untouched. It felt tainted, like a cursed object. For a long time I didn't know what to do with it. Keeping it felt wrong, but giving it all away felt like letting Jessica and Mark win in some strange, convoluted way. It was a problem I wasn't ready to solve. My first priority, my only priority, was Lily. Robert Vance helped me set up an ironclad trust for her education and her future, ensuring that she would be secure for the rest of her life, managed by professionals who would protect her interests. She was living with me now, and our quiet home, which had once felt like a fortress, was slowly becoming a sanctuary. It was filling with the sounds of her laughter as we baked cookies, and the sight of her colorful art projects spread across the dining room table. We were building a new family, just the two of us, founded on honesty and safety. My friendship with Susan deepened into something that felt more like sisterhood. We took road trips to the coast, visited museums, and spent countless hours simply sitting on my porch, drinking tea and watching the seasons change. She had been my rock, my co-conspirator, my anchor in the storm. She never let me feel alone. But the money still sat there, a silent testament to the chaos, a tool waiting for a purpose. The idea came to me one afternoon while I was volunteering at the local library, a routine I had started to reclaim a piece of my old life. A woman came in, her face etched with a worry I knew all too well. She was in her late 60s like me, and was quietly asking the librarian for resources on legal aid. I couldn't help but overhear her story. Her son had convinced her to sign over her house to simplify her estate, and had then kicked her out, leaving her with nothing. My heart ached with a terrible sense of recognition. I knew her fear. I knew her shame. I knew her feeling of powerlessness. And in that moment I knew what I had to do. I met with Robert Vance the next day. I want to start a foundation, I told him, my voice filled with a certainty I hadn't felt in years. I don't want my name on it. I want it to be a tribute to the woman who taught me to be strong. My own mother, Eleanor. We established the Second Bloom Foundation. Its mission was simple and direct, to provide free legal counsel, emergency financial assistance, and emotional support counseling to elderly individuals who were victims of familial financial abuse and manipulation. We used the bulk of the lottery winnings to create an endowment, ensuring the foundation would exist long after I was gone. We hired a small team of dedicated lawyers, social workers, and financial advisors who shared our passion. The first time I walked into our small rented office space and saw the name the Second Bloom Foundation on the door, I felt a sense of purpose that the money itself had never given me. It was no longer tainted. It was redeemed. My life found a new rhythm. Mornings were for Lily. Afternoons were for the foundation, not as a boss but as a volunteer, answering phones, listening to stories. Evenings were for quiet reflection, for music, for friends. I wasn't just Carol the victim, or Carol the lottery winner. I was Carol the survivor. Carol the founder. I had taken the ugliest chapter of my life and used it to build something beautiful and strong. Something that would protect others from the darkness I had faced. I found my purpose not in the millions I won, but in the life I rebuilt from the ashes of betrayal. I'm telling you this story, all of it, not for pity or for praise. I'm telling it because I know with a certainty that settles deep in my bones that I am not the only one. The details of my story, the lottery win, the hidden cameras may be unique, but the heart of it, the betrayal by those you trust most, the quiet terror of being erased, the fight to reclaim your own voice, is a story that belongs to too many. If you are listening to this right now, and you hear echoes of your own life in my words, if you have ever felt your reality being questioned, your independence being chipped away, I want to speak directly to you. If you have ever been made to feel small, confused, or crazy by the very people who should have protected you, I see you. If you have ever looked at a loved one and seen a stranger looking back, I understand your pain. Please hear me now. You are not invisible. You are not powerless. Your mind is your own. Your life is your own. The first step is the hardest. It is admitting to yourself that the unthinkable is happening. It is trusting your own instincts over their manipulative words. Your strength is not in silent suffering. It is in silent planning. It is in gathering your proof, finding your allies, and building your fortress one brick at a time. Never ever let someone else write the final chapter of your story. You are the author and you alone hold the pen. My journey was long and painful, but on the other side of it, I found a new beginning, a second bloom. And you can too. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for listening to my story today. If it moved you, if it resonated with you in any way, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more stories of survival and strength. And most importantly, I want to invite you to use the comment section below as a safe space. Share your story. Share your triumphs. Share your fears. Let's build a community where we can support each other, where every voice is heard and every story matters. Because healing truly begins the moment you realize you are not alone. Thank you for listening.